All right, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thank you for joining us today. This is the Successful Atlassian Cloud Migration webinar. Welcome, we're glad to have you here today. Today we are going to talk about all things cloud migration. My name is David Mitchell. I'm an Atlassian certified professional and a consultant that works with Expium. Expium is an Atlassian Platinum partner. And I'm also part of Expium's Atlassian Cloud Migration team. Before we get started, I just wanted to do a couple of housekeeping items here. A couple of things to keep in mind. At the end of the webinar, our producer is going to put a list of links into the chat for you to grab. We call that our migration resource library. We used to share this information throughout the course of the webinar, but the number of links got to be so lengthy that we don't want you to have to be concerned with copying and pasting a bunch of links throughout the webinar. So we're going to provide that to you at the end. So please stay till the end so you can grab that. That's a lot of valuable information that will serve you well to have available as you're doing your research, as you're planning your migration. Additionally, we're going to have a Q&A time at the end. What I want to mention to you on that is feel free to post your questions in the Q&A chat throughout the webinar as I'm speaking. I won't be seeing those and responding to those as I'm presenting the material, but I will see those at the end. If there's anything related to what we're talking about that I don't cover, please post those in the Q&A, and we want to answer any questions that you may have. All right, getting started, we're going to look at the cloud migration roadmap. This is a cloud migration roadmap that is actually provided by Atlassian. This is a diagram of a roadmap, and this is pretty much how migrations go. Here at Expium, we have a lot of consultants that have a lot of experience doing migrations, so we've been through all of this many times. Not only is this Atlassian's roadmap, this also is going to serve as our outline, so to speak, as we go through the material today in the webinar. A couple of things to mention about these 6 items here. We've got assess, plan, prep, test, migrate, and launch in that order. A couple of things to mention. Those first 3 items, assess, plan, and prep, those are going to be lengthy items in time-wise relative to the rest of the items. Assessment is going to take you a while. Planning is going to take you a while. Preparation is going to take you a while. Testing hopefully doesn't take too long. Migration should be pretty quick, and launch should be pretty quick. Depending on the complexity of your migration and the decision-making process of your organization, this whole entire process from beginning to end can take anywhere from 2 to 12 months. 12 months is kind of long. It's possible, but that's not real common. 2 months is pretty short. It's not a whole lot of, there are not a whole lot of migrations that we see that are as short as 2 months or as long as 12 months, but that kind of gives you an idea of the range. A couple other points to make in terms of this whole process. You need to start early in terms of getting your InfoSec team involved in the conversation. Ideally at the beginning, in the assess phase, make sure that you reach out to them, let them know what you're planning, have them review the items that they need to review in terms of approval. And the reason we say that is because we have seen companies get into the process of doing a migration, and they'll get into doing the assessment, planning, and prep, and get close to doing the migration, only to then have their OPSEC team pop up and say, "Hey, wait a minute, we don't know if we're going to approve this." And unfortunately, it can put a snag in some things. Sometimes it's been rare, but we've seen that delay a migration or change the timeline. So it's in your best interest to get them involved early on. And on this topic, in the migration resource library that we're going to provide to you, we're going to provide you a link that is a cloud guide, is Atlassian's cloud migration guide that will provide more detailed information. So why migrate to cloud? As most of you are probably aware, Atlassian has delivered their server end of life announcement. And what that boils down to is on February 15th of 2024, server isn't going to go away, but support and updates to that product will stop. You can continue to use the product as long as you like, but it will no longer be supported, and you will no longer receive any kind of updates or security updates or bug fixes. Most companies aren't going to be comfortable with that and are going to be wanting to move to a different platform before that or shortly thereafter. That's one of the reasons why, that's probably the main reason most people are looking to migrate to cloud. Another reason is cloud features. Between server and cloud, the feature set of cloud is just a lot richer. And there's really not that much more to say about that. The cloud product is just, it's a really great product. It has a lot more features that people appreciate. So that is a motivator to go to cloud. Next, we're going to talk about what can I migrate to cloud. Here we have a list of Atlassian products, and in the green circled here, you can see these are products that you can migrate to cloud. All of the Jira products, Bitbucket and Confluence, these are all products that have server versions of the products that you can migrate to cloud. These have cloud versions of the same product. Additionally, the items circled in blue, Crowd and Bamboo, are products that don't have a cloud version, but they have an analog product that Atlassian provides that sort of does the same thing or takes its place. In terms of Crowd, there's Atlassian Access that you can use for user management. In terms of Bamboo, when it comes to Bitbucket pipelines can serve to fill in the role that Bamboo is taking as Bitbucket pipelines become more robust. Next, let's look at the options that you have available to you when you migrate. You have a couple of different options. You have, when coming off of server, you can go to cloud or you can go to data center. And before we dive in here, I just want to say that the point of this slide is to show that in 95% of the cases, the cloud platform is going to meet or exceed your needs. And also to illustrate that the circumstances in which you would need to go to data center are few and rare. There's not a lot of cases where you really need to go to data center. So let's just look at the first item there. In terms of scale, there's really not a lot of difference. With data center, it's unlimited. As long as you can add servers and nodes, there's really no limit. In terms of users for cloud, it used to be 20,000 users per instance. It has now been almost doubled. Atlassian recently raised it to 35,000 users. If that's not enough in cloud, you can go to the enterprise subscription tier to have unlimited instances, in which case you can have as many instances as you want of up to 35,000 users. As I'm sure you're probably already thinking, the vast majority of companies out there are not even going to need more than 35,000 users in one instance. If you are in that rare situation where you need to have more than 35,000 users in one instance, and it's a deal breaker, it's not negotiable, then that pretty much makes the decision for you. You would need to go to data center to do that. Let's look at the next three items sort of together: reliability, security and compliance, and governance. I want to look at these together because they're all similar in that the differences between these items on data center and cloud have to do with how you manage those items on data center. Some companies are in a position and they have the resources to manage these really well. Some companies aren't in a position to manage those as well. In terms of reliability, cloud is going to meet or exceed what you would probably be able to manage on your own in data center. In terms of security and compliance, again, cloud is going to probably meet or exceed what you would manage to do on your own in data center. If you feel that you have exceptional security needs that would go above and beyond what cloud can offer, then you might choose to use data center. In those cases, I would say if that applies to you, you know who you are. Governance is a little bit different. This slide says for cloud, it's Atlassian managed, data center you manage. Atlassian does provide sort of a minimum level for you, but in both cases, I would say whether you're on cloud or data center, you need to implement your own level of governance. If you don't have any kind of governance in place and the use of your instance just kind of turns into the wild, wild west, that can be not a whole lot of fun and not in your best interest over the longer term. And I will also say in terms of governance, if you need help setting that up, please feel free to reach out to Expium, go out to our website, grab our phone number, give us a call. We have training available on that and we can consult on that. We're willing to answer any questions you may have about that. So if you need help with that, reach out to us. In terms of apps and extensibility, the last item, pretty much just cutting to the chase here, cloud wins hands down. In terms of what Atlassian is doing and the third-party vendors are doing in terms of their development of third-party apps and extensions, all of the focus is going towards the cloud. And in terms of choice and selection, there's just more there. So that gives you an idea of the difference. And another difference that's not on this slide that I'll mention real quick is it's not so much that all other things are equal. Data center is also a lot more expensive license. So your needs for what you may feel you may have to have for data center are going to need to be pretty significant if you're going to want to pay the higher license fees. Next, let's look at the subscription levels in cloud. This is still a part of your assessment phase as you're looking at what you're going to be doing here. Before I jump in, I just want to tell you right out of the gate. So, well, we've got there are the 4 subscription levels: free, standard, premium, and enterprise. Right out of the gate, I'm going to tell you that what we see with most companies and most of our customers, most companies use premium. There are a smaller percentage of companies that use standard that may want to save money and may be able to say we're comfortable and all we need is the more basic feature set. The companies and clients that we have that use enterprise is a smaller percentage as well, because those are just the exceptionally large companies that need the fullest advanced feature set and also perhaps needing the unlimited instances. The reason that premium tends to be the most popular is because there are some features of premium that are only available with premium. They're not available as an add-on if you have standard. You can't have standard and just add these other ones on. And a couple of them are highlighted here in the lighter blue. Advanced roadmaps is a very popular one. Having a sandbox is a big advantage of premium over standard. And automation with premium, you can have automation that it says global automation. What that means is it can the automations can span the scope of across several projects or across your entire instance, whereas on standard you can have automation, but it stays within the scope of a single project. Another thing that we'll mention here on as illustrated on the slide is Access. Atlassian Access is available by prescription. In enterprise level, you can see that it's included. If you're doing standard or premium and you want to have access, you have to add it by subscription. Also, I'll just, fair point up front, I'll tell you what we see in terms of most of our customers. Most customers do choose to subscribe to Access. More of them do than don't. Access is your product that you will use to manage your users, do user provisioning, single sign-on. You can do without it if your user base is small enough to where your Jira administrators can manually manage those. The more users you have to manage, the more reasonable, the more practical, and the more necessary Access is going to be for you. Next, let's look at a cloud platform benefits survey. And this is just sort of an interesting list. I'll also say we're interested in knowing what you feel the top benefits of cloud are. So also feel free to drop that in the Q&A chat. Let us know what you think the best benefits are of any on this list or any even off of this list. So the first one, peace of mind around maintaining security and version upgrades. That kind of surprised me a little bit, but I guess it's because users, when they're on cloud, they just know that they don't have to worry about it anymore. It's sort of off their plate. It's taking care of them. Improved speed and accessibility, understandable, because in today's remote workplace scenarios, if you're accessing an on-prem based instance over the internet, over a VPN, that wasn't designed from the ground up to be optimized over the internet, it's not going to perform very well. And a lot of us are used to that. It's just kind of how it is these days. But if you're using that, say on a server remotely, and you go to cloud, a platform that has been optimized to be performant over the internet, you will notice an increase in speed. Improved employee satisfaction. I'm not sure what that is from, other than maybe it's just a richer feature set in cloud. Improved performance goes along with number 2. Reduced total cost of ownership for Atlassian products. That's understandable, and that's something we're going to talk about on the next slide. Improved security. If you don't have you know, a large group of top of the line IT staff to manage your security, cloud can provide improved security for you over an on-premise instance. Increased capacity for teams to focus on strategic goals. That must be from just some more satisfaction with the cloud product, I suppose. Better third-party apps and integrations. That is no doubt true. That's understandable. So with that, we will go ahead and go to the next slide and talk about this, what's item number 5 here on this list, which is the reduced cost of ownership. As you can see here, the items shown in blue here on the slide are referred to licensing costs and administration costs. Cloud, the licensing and administration costs or subscription costs are greater than what you would have in an on-premise environment. But as you can see, in an on-premise environment, you have all of the additional costs involved, the implementation, the maintenance, change management, security upgrades, performance, actually building and housing a data center and all the employees that go along with it, just jacks the total cost of ownership up quite a bit. So with all of those taken out of the way in the cloud, the total cost of ownership in cloud is significantly less. Next, we're going to talk about cloud adjustments and challenges. I'm going to selectively talk to some of these. User and group management. When you go to cloud, one thing to be aware of is that user management and group management is going to be different. It's going to be different enough that you may need to have a little bit of training before you go to cloud, or you may need to spin up a cloud instance and play around with it and get familiar with it first. It's not a situation where you go to cloud and the UI and the way it all functions is exactly the same as it is on server, because it isn't. In terms of user management, one thing that you're going to have to get used to is in cloud, user identification in cloud by Atlassian is by email address. So all users in cloud are recognized by a unique email address. If you migrate to cloud and you turn on Atlassian Access, you may find you have a lengthy list of users show up that you didn't know existed before. Those would be users that are using email addresses based on your company email address. Group management is different because when you get to cloud, you'll find that in terms of administrators and just groups, the groups are set up differently in terms of administrators. There are more and different groups of administrators that have different roles in cloud relative to what exists in server. There are site administrators, there are administrators, there are Jira administrators, there are organization administrators. So there's a learning curve there. That's something to be aware of. User interface differences. There are some user interface differences between cloud and server. Those user interface differences, the gap between there is getting smaller over time. But what we see is that there's enough of a difference that when we have a customer migrating from server to cloud, we will often set up a couple of 1-hour sessions with them just to sort of give them a tour, a walkthrough of the UI and Jira and Confluence to familiarize them with what some of the differences are. It's not something that would be really disruptive, because if you didn't take that survey or that walkthrough and you would pull up a server instance of Jira and a cloud instance of Jira, at a first glance, you probably wouldn't see any difference. You probably wouldn't even notice much difference at all. And generally speaking, all the features are in the same place. If you don't have a preview of it, you may just spend some time, clicking around trying to find your options. But it's useful. It's different enough that it's useful to have a walkthrough. So just be aware that that is there. And if you are working with an Atlassian partner, whether it's us or another Atlassian partner, it's worthwhile to have them do that demonstration for you. In terms of, let me back up here. In terms of the migration process when it comes to Jira automation, one of the things to be aware of, is that Jira automations in server do not automatically migrate to cloud. Actually, that's really not problematic. If it sounds problematic, it's not. The point being that you need to be aware of is that you will need to rebuild those automations in cloud. Jira work management projects. In cloud, this is a difference between cloud and server. In server, you have Jira Core. In cloud, Jira Core has been retooled into what's called Jira Work Management Projects. And Jira Work Management Projects have a lot of nice, fancier new features built into them that Jira Core does not. So we're going to just briefly take a look at that real quick. What I have here is an example of a Jira Work Management project. And I'm just going to point out to you some differences here. When you go into a Jira Work Management project, you sort of have the feel like you've purchased and you've implemented a whole new application that's just a complete turnkey tool to be used in and of itself. And that's what Atlassian has designed it to be. You've got a summary of the project. There's a lot of nicer UI elements here. There's a task board with Jira Work Management projects. There's not a task board with Jira Core. This is not the same as a Scrum or Kanban board in Jira software, but it's just a basic, simple task board, but it's a great feature that's not there in Jira Core. There's also this list view that a lot of people really like. It has the look and feel of a spreadsheet, and it can even allow you to do some inline changes of some items here just within the list, this grid. So that's a nice feature. There's also a calendar view that gives you a calendar representation of your work. That doesn't exist in Jira Core. Additionally, there's this timeline, and this is sort of like a roadmap kind of planning tool, like you'll see in Jira software or advanced roadmaps. This doesn't exist in Jira Core. It's a nice feature. It's useful. You have forms that you can create in work management, and that is probably the most of the differences that I can refer to right now. But that's a difference between software and cloud. That's a really nice difference. It's really enhanced feature in cloud over server. One last thing that we'll mention is in cloud, there are team managed projects. This is something you will not run into on server because they don't exist on server. It's something you need to be aware that exists in cloud, and team managed projects basically means that it's a feature where users can just spontaneously spin up their own projects to create their own workspace and start doing work. There are some situations where that can be useful, but right after you do a migration, for that to be out there and available and on by default, which it is on by default, it can create a little bit of confusion because all of these, some new projects can be spun up by users spontaneously, and they will not be managed by you in the way that typical company managed projects are managed. You don't need that kind of new variable thrown into your work process right after you do a migration. So while it can be a useful feature in certain circumstances, what we recommend is that you turn this feature off before you do in cloud, before you do your migration, which you can do. That is also something to be aware of. Next, let's look at the timeline of your total migration. This is a slide we call complexity equals time. And basically, there are a variety of these factors involved with your instance that will affect how long your migration is going to take. User count is a factor. The more users you have can make your migration take longer, especially when you get into the really high number of users. The number and types of add-ons that you have will add complexity to your migration. How much automation you have in place will have, the more you have, the more complexity that will add to your migration and thus make it longer. The number of how many third-party integrations you have, if any, will add to the complexity and length of time of your migration, and how many instances you may have. So as you're looking at your migration and you're doing this assessment phase and you're trying to figure out how long your migration is going to take, you look at all of these factors and you establish your timeline. If you're working with an Atlassian business partner, whether it's us or any other Atlassian business partner, they can help you take all of these considerations into account and establish what is a reasonable timeline based on the experience that they have with the migrations they have done. All right, next we're just going to take a brief time out to do a little bit of a commercial here, talking about Expium. Expium is the sponsor of this webinar today. Expium is a Platinum Solution Partner, which is the highest level of partner that exists. In order to be a Platinum Solution Partner, you have to have a certain number of Atlassian certified professionals. Here's just a brief list of what Expium has to offer. In terms of training, we have all kinds of training, whether we have free training, paid training, we have in-person and online training. We can do custom training. We have training on any topic you could possibly need. At the end of the webinar, there's going to be a link to our training page on our website that you can look at to take a look at the list of free and paid items we have. And also, if you need any custom training just for your company, we can do that as well. So if you're needing any kind of training, feel free to reach out to us. Go look at our website, grab the phone number, give us a call. We'd love to talk to you about that. We also do consulting. We do consulting on all and any topics having to do with any Atlassian product. And consulting is really the heartbeat of what we do here. So if there's anything you need help with in any capacity, whether it's you need us to just dive in and do it all for you, or if you're going to be doing a project yourself, but you want our assistance there to give you guidance and help, be there for questions to keep you on track, we're here and available for that. So if you need consulting, reach out to us for that. We're also able to do custom development. We have a sister company called Oasis Digital that can do custom development if you need that. In terms of licensing, when you're looking at your licensing in the cloud, Atlassian has tried to make it as simple as possible, but it can still be something that can be kind of a wrestling match when you're looking at what subscription tier you're going to use, and you start looking at the add-ons that you're gonna subscribe to and what those are going to cost. If you have questions, and really that's kind of a trick question, it's not if you have questions, you will have questions. When you have questions, you can reach out to an Atlassian partner. Feel free to reach out to us. We have people here that are dedicated to handling licensing and can answer your questions, and it's a free service. There's really no charge. Just go to the website, get our phone number, give us a call. We can put you in touch with somebody that can just answer your questions. If you want to do licensing through a partner, we can do that with you as well. This slide actually says when you license with Expium, you will receive the same price as you would directly from Atlassian. Actually, there are a lot of cases where we can give you a little bit of a discount. So definitely reach out to us if you have any licensing questions or you want help with your licensing. It's free, and it only serves to make your process smoother and potentially save you a little bit of money. All right, we'll jump back into the webinar here. Next, we're going to talk about user management as you go to the cloud. This is getting into your planning phase now. In terms of migration, one of the biggest challenges and considerations you will have will be in the area of managing users. The cloud platform identifies users by email address. Therefore, all of your users will need to have a unique email address. And this is not something that is typically the case in a server environment. So this is something that you have to get in order before you do the migration, because if it's not in order, the migration process actually will not work. As you're running the migration process, it will throw errors and it won't complete. If you have duplicate and or invalid email addresses in any of your directories in your server environment, those will need to be eliminated, or maybe eliminated isn't the right word, but corrected before you migrate to cloud. You will also need to decide if you want to do manual or automated user provisioning. And we've talked about this a little bit already. If you want to do automated user provisioning, then you're going to need to subscribe to Atlassian Access. If you want single sign-on, then you will also definitely need to have Atlassian Access for that. Relative to all of that, when we talk about the migration resource library that we're going to be providing to you at the end, we will be providing with a link to information about all things Atlassian Access. Next, we're going to talk about the process of just implementing your migration process. When you do a migration process, it's a lengthy process. You're going to need to have a system in place to do some work tracking. You need to have a way to track the work involved with your migration because it's a complex process. Briefly here, what we do at Expium when we assist customers with migrations, we actually use the Atlassian products, Jira and Confluence as planning tools. We use Jira and Confluence and as a shared platform between us and the client for all project work. And we use Jira for creating and tracking deliverables and work items. And we use Confluence for reporting, a project dashboard, storing artifacts, and other documentation. Whether we work with you or not, or whether you do the migration yourself, we recommend that you do something like that to implement a work tracking aspect of your migration process. Another part of planning that we're going to talk about here on this slide is to determine the best strategy that you are going to use in terms of how you are going to move your data to cloud. Okay, there's 4 options that we generally see, and those are optimize and shift, lift and shift, a phased approach, and start fresh. So briefly, I'm just going to talk about what those are. There's the optimize and shift approach, and that's where you're going to do a migration where you do an all-at-once migration, but you look at your server instance beforehand and you clean up the things that you would like to clean up and have the opportunity to use the migration as a reason and a time and an excuse to clean up. It can be beneficial to get things cleaned up before you migrate, so you don't wind up migrating a lot of unnecessary old baggage. Alternatively, you don't have to optimize and shift. You can do what we just call lift and shift, where you don't do any optimization, you just wholesale take all of your data and copy it all over to cloud. The third approach that you might choose to take is a phased approach. And what that means is project by project. If you don't have to have all of your company move from one platform to the other in one fell swoop at the same time, you can have teams move project by project from server to cloud. And we have seen that done successfully. And for some companies that serves them well. So that's an option. Another option would be start fresh. A lot of companies look at the fact that they need to migrate and they think in terms of migration, but when they really start looking at it, it's feasible and practical and even beneficial for them to just start fresh. And what they mean, and it's similar to the phase approach, it's where instead of migrating or moving data in a phase approach, you just build out your new instance in cloud and you have your teams or your projects just start using the new project, start entering and working on their new work in their cloud version of their project, and start wrapping up and finishing up their work on server and just sort of phase over that way. And that way you don't actually have to do a migration process of moving a lot of data. And that's what start fresh means. Also, in terms of planning, you need to determine the best method of moving your data, or what method or tool. Atlassian provides migration assistant tools that you can use. There's also the option in certain cases to use a site import tool. You can use CSV imports. You can do a space-by-space import with Confluence. Depending on your circumstances, an Atlassian business partner can help you evaluate those options and decide which one is best for you. On this topic, in our migration resource library, we're going to provide you with a couple of resources, links to some resources online. One is what gets migrated with Jira Cloud Migration Assistant and what gets migrated with Confluence Cloud Migration Assistant. That information can help you as you're doing your research and you're deciding which method or tool you are going to use. Next, let's talk about what kind of communication and preparation you're going to have to do of your server before you do a migration. In terms of communication, you need to start socializing your migration with your organization. Start talking about it. Start letting people know. Let people know that it's coming. Let people know the benefits and how the new features are in cloud and how it's going to be better. Give them the reasons to look forward to it. Let them know when it's going to be happening. In terms of that, you need to actually develop a communication plan. If you need help with that, Expium can provide user communication recommendations and boilerplate emails and a schedule and et cetera, et cetera. That's something that we have available, and we work with customers quite a bit on developing that communication plan. In terms of server preparation, there is some server preparation that you will likely need to do before you migrate. One thing is you will need to look at the server version that you have installed on your server. It may need to be upgraded. Even if you're relatively up to date, it still may be to your advantage to go ahead and get onto the latest version. That is something that needs to be reviewed. As mentioned before, it can be helpful to do some cleanup on your server if need be. You also need to develop a pre-migration checklist. This is something that we always help customers do, and this is a literal list of checklist items that you need to make sure that you have performed on your server before you do your migration to make sure that your migration goes well. What we usually do is we wind up performing that checklist on a test server and just testing that and working it out that way. Another thing that you need to do in terms of server preparation is you need to review all of your third-party apps and add-ons and look at what cloud versions are available, what cloud versions may or may not be available, how your migration is going to be impacted by those third-party apps that you're using. Some third-party apps may have an easily transitional equivalent in cloud that you can just easily transition to. Some of them don't. All of those need to be reviewed, and Atlassian Business Partner can help you do that evaluation. Next, let's look at, in terms of preparation, creating your runbook and your timeline. It is absolutely essential that you create a runbook for your migration process, meaning the actual steps that you will take and you will step through step by step as you perform your migration over a migration weekend, whether it be your migration weekend or an evening, whether it's overnight. You have to create that runbook to make sure that you have everything in order. And part of that runbook is also establishing the timeline of each of those steps in the runbook. So as you create that runbook, you also go through the steps in a test or rehearsal sort of way before the migration, so you have an idea of how long each one of those steps are going to take. And that allows you to plan for the actual time that you're going to need to perform your migration. You want to make sure that you have enough time to get all the steps done before whenever the next time is, the next business morning when people are going to come in and need to be using the system. So those are two things in terms of prep that you're going to need to do. You're going to need to create a runbook and establish the timeline. Next, let's talk about testing that migration process. After you have done those two steps, you've got your runbook. You're going to need to test the migration process. And as I just mentioned, this will involve performing a test run of your migration, a rehearsal, so to speak. And you may do this, you probably will do this more than once. You will perform a test run of the migration in a test environment. You will run into issues and you will tweak and enhance your migration process. Any issues come up, you will resolve those. You'll update and improve your runbook in the process. You will need to repeat that process of testing until your process is stable and successful and predictable. Like the slide says, your goal is to have a stable and predictable migration process. You need to have that established before you go into your migration weekend or migration evening. Also, a recommendation is to avoid modifications to your process between the time that you've done testing and you actually do your migration. Actually avoid any modifications of anything, whether it be your process or your server. If there's anything about your process that changes or anything that you change in terms of configuration on your server between the time you've done your last test and the time you do your migration, you really need to run through that test again to make sure that you haven't introduced a variable that could snag your migration. So avoid modifications completely as much as you can. In terms of the migration resource library on this topic, we are going to provide you a link to the Atlassian Cloud Migration Guide that addresses all of these items in detail. After you've done that testing, another part of that testing is doing user acceptance testing. We'll look at that next. In order to do user acceptance testing, select your user acceptance testing group of people from key managers, stakeholders, and users. And after you've practiced that test migration, have those people help you do that test. Have them test common day-to-day tasks. Have them test workflows. Have them review screens. After you've completed all of that testing and all is acceptable and well and good, you will be primed and ready to take the next step, which is the actual migration. All right, let's look at that migration process. In terms of doing the actual migration, you need to pick the date, decide when it's going to be. You need to arrange Atlassian support. You need Atlassian support to be aware that your migration is happening and be ready to provide support for you. Any Atlassian business partner can help you with that. Communicate to your organization all of the details of the migration. Resolve any last minute issues. Execute your runbook, being sure that you've completed the pre-migration checklist and test migration. Set your servers to read only, limit access to it, and provide warnings to everyone so everyone knows when it's happening. So you perform that migration process, and then the next thing you do is launching, and part of that launching process is doing that user acceptance testing again that we just referred to earlier. You're going to need that same group of user acceptance, the UAT testers, to do that UAT testing in your new prod in the instance that you have just migrated to. After you have them do that, that's the point where you will make a go or no-go decision. In most cases, it'll be a go decision, but you need to be ready to look at what factors are going to be involved in making that decision. If it's a no-go decision, then you can be prepared to do a rollback, so to speak. In most cases with the cloud migration, you'll just announce to everyone and they will come back in the next day, Monday or whenever it is, and continue using the production server the way it was before. That typically doesn't happen, but that's part of the process of the launch. You do more UAT testing, you make that decision. After you've decided that it's a go, you send that announcement to everyone and you let them know that it's a go. Send out an email to the new site, provide login instructions, give all your users all the information that they need in terms of how they can get support, etc. after you've actually launched that first business day, when people are using the new system for the first day, monitor and mitigate any go live issues. Typically, there aren't a lot of things that are issues. If they are, they're relatively small, like maybe a little detail of a workflow may have gotten overlooked and you need to, remedy that. And after you've got gotten to that point, you have completed your migration. And one last step that we recommend is to reflect and celebrate. And while that may sound a little corny, you really need to do that. You need to take your migration team and have a way to celebrate. Bring in some food or go out to a happy hour somewhere and celebrate the fact that you have successfully completed your migration, because it's a huge accomplishment. It's a lot of work and it's a big deal. And the fact that you've completed that and gotten that done is something that you should appreciate yourselves for and give yourselves credit, give yourself a pat on the back. All right. That concludes the content of the webinar. We're going to go ahead and move into the Q&A section now. We'll take a look at any questions that there may be. I don't see any yet, but I will speak to a couple of questions that we often see. One question is, do I have to leave server? No, you don't have to. You can continue to use server for as long as you like, despite the fact that it's no longer supported. You will have to remain at the same license count without support indefinitely, because after support has ended for server, should you need to increase your user count, the availability of increasing that user count to a higher license level is not available. How do I know if I need a partner? Can I do this myself? In a lot of cases, you're really going to need, this isn't a selling point, but in a lot of cases, you're going to need a partner in some capacity. If you have a highly trained technical IT staff that has bandwidth, it's possible that you could do the migration on your own. If you don't have that, you really need a business partner helping you out with that. And if that's the case, you can reach out to us. You don't have to use us. You can use any business partner, but we'd be happy to help you. Feel free to reach out to us and give us a call. We can talk to you about those details. Sometimes we get a question about the serverless platform that Atlassian offers for app development. Can you share any info on that? What that question is about is, in cloud, the third-party apps, a lot of third-party apps, the way they run, they will run on the servers of that application provider, not necessarily on Atlassian servers. Atlassian has provided this new platform called Forge, where those apps can run in a space that is managed by Atlassian. So when you're looking at those, if that's a concern for you, you can check and see what apps may or may not be running within that context. All right, I don't see any questions. That concludes our presentation. Right now, our producer is going to go ahead and drop the migration resource library into the chat for you to grab. On this slide, you can also see there's a link listed there on our website, expium.com/training. Feel free to take a look at that, to look at our training opportunities there on the Expium website. My email is listed here along with one of my coworkers who actually coordinates our entire migration efforts here at Expium. Feel free to reach out to me by email if you have any questions. With that said, we will leave the webinar open with the migration resource library listed there in the chat for you to grab at your convenience. With that said, from all of us here at Expium, thank you for being with us and have an excellent day.